Right, well, we've certainly still got sound in here, so hopefully there's sound on YouTube, and no doubt we'll get we have. I'm getting a thumbs up. So we'll resume. We'll carry on where you got to, I think, please, on Mr. Ashcroft.
Chairman, thank you. For those of you who might have joined us online again, if I take you back to the beginning of this slide, the application site is within the green belt. And government attaches significant importance to green belts. The fundamental aim of green belts is to keep land permanently up. And paragraphs 147 and 148 of the NPPF give us very clear guidance about how we should be handling applications in the green belt. Paragraph 147 says that inappropriate development by definition is harmful to the green belt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. Paragraph 148 starts to advise us about very special circumstances. Plainly, because it's an exception, it doesn't define what is likely to be very special circumstances. But it tells us that those circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the green belt by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm is clearly outweighed by other considerations. So the matter that you need to grapple with is whether, in your view, the very special circumstances here are so significant as to be outweighed or to outweigh the harm to the green belt. Court cases have made it quite clear that that judgment is a matter for the decision maker. So this afternoon, it's a matter for you. This isn't necessarily a legal matter, it's a matter of judgment for the decision maker to make. We can have the next slide, please. And the NPPF is clear about circumstances where there's an overlap between applications for renewable energy, such as this, and when they're in the green belt. Paragraph 151 of the NPPF says, when located in the green belt, as we are here, elements of many renewable energy projects will comprise inappropriate development. And some of the slides that Mr. Cook will show you, both of the solar arrays and the associated buildings, will be inappropriate development. In such cases, developers will need to demonstrate very special circumstances if projects are to proceed. And again, I'll explain to you some of the details that the applicant has submitted and how we've assessed those. Such very special circumstances may include the wider environmental benefits associated with increased production of energy from renewable energy sources. So the government is saying, on the one hand, some of these developments will be inappropriate in the green belt, but on the other hand, they may constitute very special circumstances. And effectively here, you're comparing apples with pears. You're comparing harm to the green belt on the one hand with solar panels on the other hand, which may generate the electricity needs of 14,000 houses. We could have the next slide, please. Which gives you a flavour of what your own local plan policies are saying. And you'll be delighted to know, and I'll just say by way of context, that your local plan policies were actually quite in advance of themselves at that time. Because you'll be delighted to know that there's very little, if any, conflict between local policies and the hot off the press national policies. So I won't read that out, but effectively, Local Plan Part 1 is generally promoting and encouraging decentralised renewable and low carbon energy schemes, subject to detailed planning considerations, which we'll describe later. We could have the next slide, please. And you get into Local Plan Part 2, which in this case is Policy 16, which says, you see it at the top, Proposals for renewable energy schemes will be granted planning permission where they're acceptable in terms of a series of criteria. I haven't listed all of the criteria, but those are the most clear and obvious criteria to this particular application. And you'll see, and you won't be surprised to see compliance with Greenbelt policy, landscape and visual effect, best and most versatile agricultural land, the historic environment, amenity of nearby properties, cumulative impact with existing and proposed development. Actually, it's a testimony to the officers who wrote that policy that it's almost perfectly geared up for the determination of this planning application. Chairman, it's interesting to note that in both local plan part 1 and part 2, they are general or criteria-based policies. At no point does the local plan seek to identify sites which may be appropriate or relevant for renewable energy. Equally, it doesn't identify areas that will not be appropriate. So again, it's that matter for your judgment. Chairman, you'll see in the schedule of late comments and representations that we've carried out a very high level assessment of this application against the informal policy which has recently been prepared by the LDF group, including officers, on guidance on this matter to assist the preparation of future planning applications. And I'll be more than happy to answer any questions which might arise from that assessment. If we can have the next slide, please. And we'll just continue to look at this plan. But just what I'd like to share with you is the application is underpinned by a series of detailed documents. The first is a landscape and visual appraisal, which we'll see in some of the slides. You'll see how the applicant has addressed those issues. The applicant has also carried out a detailed Greenbelt review and assessed this application against the 5 purposes of the Greenbelt. The applicant has also carried out a survey of the quality of the agricultural land. The applicant has also carried out an alternative site assessment. So this site comes to you after that process was concluded. There's a very detailed planning, design and access statement, which does what it was expected to do, setting out the principles and the parameters of the application. There's a detailed assessment of biodiversity net gain. And there's an assessment of the cumulative and landscape and visual effects. And in effect, what the applicant has done is looked in great detail at all the criteria in Policy 16 of Local Plan Part 2 and sought to address those issues in significant detail. And again, if any members have got any specific questions on the details, we will be happy to answer any questions later. Chairman, we have always acknowledged that this by definition is a complicated application, and by definition it's a very specialist application. And as a result of our consideration of that, and also the way in which we're assessing other similar applications, the council has commissioned an independent landscape architect to carry out a review, in particular of the landscape impact of each of the 3 planning applications. And we wanted to be very clear about that. And that independent study has proved to be particularly helpful, both generally and on this particular application. Chairman, just 4 elements of feedback from that independent study on this application. The first is that it advises and confirms that the landscape assessment has followed good practice and provides justified conclusions. The second is that study recommended detailed refinements to landscape mitigation measures, which have been incorporated by the applicant in recent months. And Mr. Cook will show you some details of how that mitigation has followed through. Chairman, the third is that the independent consultant has concluded that the Greenbelt review follows commonly accepted methodology. And that consultant agrees with the applicant's assessment that the harm to the Greenbelt would be limited and localised. Fourthly and finally, Chairman, but perhaps crucially, the independent consultant has concluded that the cumulative effects between the three current applications, including this one for solar farms. And he's concluded that due to the intervening vegetation between the three, due to the topography of the local landscape, and due to elements of the built environment, there's not an issue of intervisibility between the three sites. And in the event that, and plainly it's not his place to tell the committee what to do with the applications, but in the event that you were minded to grant permission for all three, in his view, there would be no cumulative visual effects arising from their development because of those factors. We could have the next slide, please. You'll be pleased to know this is my final slide. But also, we, on the one hand, we apologise that this is a busy slide, but on the other hand, it feels that it's an important slide because it shows the current live applications and it shows emerging proposals for similar solar schemes. Apologies that the plan isn't perhaps quite as clear as it might otherwise have been, but any green shadings, the vertical green shadings, are current applications. Any red shadings are sites where we have given pre-application advice, and any blue shadings are where we've been invited to screen the applications for whether or not they need environmental impact assessment. Plainly, because of the evolution of these proposals, there are some overlaps between green, reds and blues, which is why it makes it slightly clumsy. But in terms of your navigation through that map, the current application site, which we're discussing this afternoon, is the site on the left-hand side, which is to the immediate east of the railway line, which you see on the western side of the map. Another application submitted at roughly the same time, 22000319 FUL, land west of Wood Lane and Stocking Lane, Bilton, is to the east of the application site. And then in the middle of the plan, you'll see another application, 22000303 full, which is at Highfields Farm, Costock. On the right-hand side of the plan, you'll see the A46 running from south to north. So hopefully that gives you a flavour about how the current application sits within this wider context. I'll just pause while I can see that some members are finding that interesting. And then,
so just to confirm that the site we're discussing today on the far left, putting it correct, yes, that is cross-hatched because it's had all elements.
It's had everything.
So it's had the pre-application advice and it's
absolutely,
you're right. Okay, so that's why there's not one defined signal on that.
Absolutely,
it's because
yes.
Okay,
yeah.
so
whereas Chairman, you're right. And so say if you would go to the middle of the map at the top, you'll see the blue lines where applications have just proposals. We've been invited to screen, in other words, make a professional judgment about if applications came in, whether they would need an environmental impact assessment. So that's why you get the different colours, which is why I said it was a busy map, but I think it's proved the point that at least members have found it interesting and gives the broader context. And then if we can have the next slide, at which point I'll hand over to my colleague, Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Ashcroft described the site quite well. Described the site quite well, so I don't really intend to go through the location description again. One thing I would add, obviously, as part of the assessment, we need to look at the agricultural quality of the land. And it is being described and has been verified by the landscape assessment that it is moderate quality agricultural land. In terms of the proposal is to construct a solar farm, photovoltaic farm, all associated infrastructure, including the inverters, substations, compounds, security cameras, fences, track access, and undertake landscaping of the site. It is estimated that solar panels will generate some 49 megawatts of power, and again that would serve 14,000 homes annually. The permission is sought for 40 years. So once that 40 years is finished, the site will be decommissioned, and the land returned to its previous state of agriculture. The information that's been submitted are the rows of solar panels, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, the inverters within containers, substation compound, including the control room and customer switchboard, and you can see those on the top right of the site, enclosed in that little red and yellow area. The internal tracks, perimeter fencing, and CCTV cameras, which will be attached to the fencing. The application, as we said, was screened for an environmental impact assessment, and it was determined that one was not required. The independent landscape and impact assessment has been commissioned by the council for this and the other sites that are currently being considered, and that helps us maintain a consistent approach throughout the borough. The ward members and the adjacent ward members have objected to the proposal on the grounds set out in your reports, but the key points are as follows: lots of amenity for residents of Kingston-upon-Soar, Ratcliffe-on-Soar, and more importantly, the cottage, which is surrounded by a copse of trees. The loss of good and very good agricultural land is contrary to Greenbelt policy and the cumulative impact of all the proposals. Importantly, no objections have been received from or raised by either the Borough Council's internal consultees or Nottinghamshire County Council. Gotham, Kingston-on-Soar and Sutton Bonington Parish Councils have all objected to the proposal on the grounds of which are in your reports, but include these schemes are all 49.9 megawatts, which avoid the need for increased planning requirements and scrutiny. A study should be undertaken to assess the cumulative impact of the solar farms and other proposed developments in the locality. Need to demonstrate very special circumstances to allow the development in the Greenbelt to outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt itself, impact on wildlife and their habitats, impact on adjacent villages, and the impact on the agricultural land in Greenbelt. No objections have been received from any of the statutory consultees. 7 neighbour representations have been made, and the key concerns raised are principles of development, impact on landscape, ecology, and all the details of which are in your reports. I now have a number of slides to show you the locality. These from here, you can see the plan at the bottom right will show you the location of where the photographs are taken from. Photographs A and B are from Gotham Road, and that is the open part of the site, which is adjacent to the road and from where access will be gained. Photograph C is further along and they follow around. D, E and F, as you can see from the plans, they are from the footpath where it crosses the site. If you look to photograph B, that shows you towards the railway line. So I see D shows you from the where it intersects with the footpath, looking towards the power station and up towards the field. That field will all be covered in solar panels. And the third one, again, it takes it along the footpath, looking towards the power station. These ones, the one with the pylon is looking along the edge of the site on the northern edge. Go back. Again, the bottom left one shows towards the railway line and the existing pylons on site, and to the right at the top, that shows you towards the property known as the cottage that's in that woodland. Again, the first photograph on the left, on the left, yeah, that's looking from the start of the footpath towards the cottage and the woodland in which it's located, but it also shows the hedge that would screen it the footpath from the main site, because the site, the field that you can see is not part of the site. That wouldn't have any solar panels on it. The next two slides or photographs, they show the view back towards the existing properties in Kingston on Soar to demonstrate that there is substantial landscaping along the rear boundaries of those sites that look towards the site, but they're not adjacent to it. This is the footpath that we were discussing. The improvements have come about as a result of the landscape assessment, and it now includes hedges either side of the footpath, a wide gap between those, which will incorporate planting, wildflower planting. Beyond that, there'll be further wildflower planting, and then the fencing towards the site. The conclusion of the landscape report was that it would have moderate impact on the landscape character, and improvements were made to the scheme to, as I say, incorporate the footpath elements. The next slide, this shows you. This shows the location of the cottage within the context of the site, and as you can see, the photograph on the left shows the view of the cottage from the footpath, and the site, the photograph right shows you the actual location of the cottage, and it demonstrates that the field in front of the cottage has been left out of the proposal, and that was a result of the pre-application advice. This is a photograph from the cottage's garden towards the site and the power station. And this is what is anticipated, the view from not from within the garden of the cottage, but from just beyond it towards the power station, would be the current view at the top, 1 year on in the centre, and you can't see it very well, but there is a hedge to be planted along the bottom of the dark blue element, and then at the bottom you can see the 15-year projection in terms of how that hedge will have grown and how it will impact in screening the site itself. Another concern that's been raised is the effect of glinting glare. This has been assessed as part of the submission, and mitigation measures that are proposed are considered to be acceptable and fall within the levels within relevant legislation and guidance. As required, the impact on the heritage asset has also been assessed, and your officers consider that the proposal as demonstrated, it has taken into account of consideration the impacts on nearby heritage assets, and having been assessed in accordance with the Planning, Listed Building and Conservation Area Act, Section 66 and 72, it does not result in any significant harm to those assets, and therefore, in terms of the assets, it is considered acceptable. As I've already said, there is a public footpath crossing the site, and as previously stated, this will be screened from the development through the planting of hedges. Impact on the amenity of nearby residents has been assessed, including traffic, noise, glint and glare, and it's been demonstrated that this would not be harmful to the extent it would justify refusal of the proposal. The highest structure associated with the proposed development will be a transformer, which was within the substation compound, and that will be approximately 6 metres high. It is proposed that the majority of the other structures, including the solar panels, would be no more than 3 metres high. It is therefore considered that the scale of the proposed development within the wider location is appropriate. The container cabins and all other small buildings will be appropriately covered and clad for the minimum visual impact on the location. The lifespan of the development is restricted to 40 years by condition, after which the site will need to be remediated and returned to agriculture. In terms of the cumulative impact, the Council's independent landscape review concludes that due to the intervening vegetation, as already stated, topography and elements of the built environment, there would be no intervisibility between the proposed sites for similar developments nearby. As such, it is considered that cumulative impact would be minimal. Surface water runoff and drainage, that will be dealt with on site, and it will be no greater than already the site experiences. It will also include they will also provide a sustainable drainage strategy to deal with and manage the runoff in any event. Notwithstanding that, the Environment Agency, the local Lead Flood Authority and the internal drainage boards have raised no objections to the proposal. Access to the site would be from Goatham Road, as shown on the photographs there. There are no objections to the proposal from the Highway Authority. A routing plan has been submitted, which shows that the route chosen minimises impact on residential properties within the locality, and it takes it from the site all the way straight to the A453. As explained in your reports, the National Planning Policy Framework is supportive of renewable energy, and subject to proper consideration of the countryside and greenbelt locations, it can be considered as inappropriate, but mitigation measures can make it acceptable. As a greenbelt site, although the proposal can be considered as inappropriate development, very special circumstances have been submitted to support the application, and these are set out in paragraph 59 of your reports. The community benefits proposed are opening up the facility to be used locally as an educational resource. And it is concluded that with appropriate mitigation, on balance, it is considered that the proposal is acceptable in accordance with the national planning policy and local planning policy. The harm of inappropriate development is therefore considered to be outweighed. In conclusion, it is recommended that on expiry of the consultation period, and in the event that no new material planning considerations have arisen from the extended period of consultation, in accordance with the Town and Country Planning Consultation England Direction 2021, the application will be referred to the National Planning Casework Unit, and that subject to the application not being called in for determination by the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, the Director of Development and Economic Growth be authorised to grant planning permission subject to the conditions listed in your reports. As the late reps state, there is a late amendment to condition 5, and in addition to that, we would like to include an element which requires the applicant to give the council a minimum of 4 weeks notice prior to the commissioning of or the production of electricity from the site, so we can manage the 40 years. So that is the amendment to condition 5. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. And as we said earlier on, we've seen the late representations and the amended condition 5, which is on the sheets here. Right, we have 3 guest speakers for this item. We have, first of all, we have Mr. Nick Bowden, who is the agent on behalf of the applicant. So, Mr. Bowden, are you here? So if you come to the seat just there, please. And the way it works is all our speakers, guest speakers, have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. It's not a two-way discussion. We just hear a presentation from each speaker. When we get to, if you're still speaking at 4.5 minutes, the clerk will let you know there's 30 seconds left, and then that's it. That's 5 minutes up. So as soon as you're ready, if you press the right-hand button on the mic, the red light will come on, and you'll be talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. My name is Nick Bowen, and I'm the planning manager here on behalf of Renewable Connections. Renewable Connections is an experienced developer and responsible and committed to developing high quality projects which see benefits delivered to local residents and the natural environment. We are grateful to receive a positive recommendation, and we feel that is testimony to the following: a rigorous assessment by officers and statutory consultees, paired with a diligent approach to finding solutions for technical issues. The selection of a site that has a low environmental impact a viable grid connection, and sits within the immediate context of the coal power station. Energy generation is an existing component in the area. Through comprehensive engagement with local stakeholders from an early stage, a number of improvements to the scheme were made, and consequently, there are no objections from technical consultees. A robust, very special circumstances case presented in the submission, which demonstrates the benefits of the scheme, including the provision of renewable energy in the context of a declared climate emergency, outweighs any harm to the green belt in policy terms. Key design changes include the exclusion of the land north of local residents, the cottage, from development, and the subsequent introduction of a row of trees along the shared boundary to provide a natural screen, minimising the impact on amenity as much as possible, as you can see from the photo montages in the presentation. The inclusion of a sizable development buffer between the site and the village to ensure that there's no adverse impact on the setting of the heritage assets and to minimise the visual impact as much as possible. Significantly widening the public right-of-way from 6 to 16 metres, in addition to planting wildflowers and hedges on either side. Altering the location of the site access to ensure that the construction vehicles will not go through the village, as you've seen from the routing map. Providing new habitat areas, including species-rich grassland, native hedgerows, wildflower margins, and bird and bat boxes, resulting in an exceptionally high 87% biodiversity net gain. Further to the environmental and biodiversity benefits of the proposal, this creates an opportunity for the landowner to diversify and retain his agricultural practice, allowing for additional income from the solar farm whilst grazing sheep in and around the panelled areas. These areas will be sown with a low-growing grazing mix and managed by the landowner as grazed pasture, which would assist in the development and spread of wildflowers within the site margins, with a consequential elevated ecological value. This is stated on the landscape and biodiversity plan that's up on screen at the moment, which is submitted for approval. Also, in response to feedback received, we produced an additional technical assessment which assessed the potential cumulative effects of our proposal in conjunction with the other existing and proposed solar farm developments in northwest Rushcliffe. The Borough Council also commissioned an external landscape and visual consultant, Wynne Williams, to undertake an independent assessment of our submitted materials. Consequently, the scheme was revised in accordance with the feedback received, and the final report issued by Wynne Williams corroborates our assessments and conclusions that there are no significant or cumulative landscape or visual impacts as a result of this proposal. Aside from generating enough clean energy to power up to 14,000 homes, plus the biodiversity net gain mentioned already, I'd like to turn your attention to why this proposal really matters. This July saw the UK's hottest day on record and one of the most intense and prolonged heat waves we've experienced.
30 seconds.
A phenomenon which would not be happening without climate change. We are fighting a climate crisis and an energy security crisis at the same time. People are really feeling the impact of rising energy costs, which is caused by volatility and wholesale gas prices. Councillors, you have before you today a well-received project with officer and consultee support that can make a huge difference to the climate and energy security crisis locally and nationally. I urge you to support your officer's recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and just on your 5 minutes as well, so thank you for that. Right, our next speaker is speaking as an objector to the application, Mr. Paul Williams. So welcome, and you'll also have up to 5 minutes to, yes, of course you can, yeah, absolutely. So as soon as you're ready, if you press the right-hand button so the red light comes on. Thank you.
I'm Paul Williams, here to represent Anna and John, residents of the cottage situated at Kingston upon Soar, adjacent to solar panels. As residents of the cottage, they will be dramatically affected by the dominance of the proposed development. This impact would have a disproportionate effect on the existing area, with a loss of natural, open, scenic countryside. The solid structures of the proposed solar arrays would form a strong physical presence with an industrial appearance. This would change the character of these rural fields directly adjoining the cottage, where John and Anna live. The proposed abutting panels will face south and not be shielded by the indicated planted screening. The cottage is elevated at the 2 metre higher, the cottage is elevated and has a 2 metre higher border of its own hedgerow. From all aspects, both building and gardening will be subject to a detrimental and uninterrupted impact of the installation of the vast sea of industrial solar panels. The cottage height is 5.4 metres greater than the photographic evidence supplied in this review you've seen today by EDP. The opposing side of the cottage is encompassed by woodland. Thus, proposed application would provide a hideous tsunami of panels encapsulating entirely the cottage, and it would be clearly overbearing. If vacacious approval were to be made, it would condemn Anna and John to a life of interment at their home, surrounded by photovoltaic prison guards, repellent security fencing, and the intrusion of CCTV. The cottage is currently home to a huge variety of wildlife. In their existing habitats and biodiversity in general is greatly disturbed by this scheme. Meeting our energy goals should not be used to justify the wrong development in the wrong location. Kingston upon Soar, as you know, is greenbelt land, and the public expects local planning authorities to recognise the character and the beauty of the countryside and mindful of the wider environmental and visual impacts. Protecting the global environment is not an excuse to trash the local environment. A secure green future must be built on its foundations of good long-term decisions, not driven by poor short-term avaricious gains. By comparison with wind farms, solar farms are hugely inefficient. As a general rule, it takes 200 acres to generate the same electricity by solar panels as one wind turbine. This represents a grossly inefficient use of precious land, whatever its quality. The applicants want to use the proposed location of Church Farm to provide power to 14,000 homes over 60 hectares. Some good, some very good agricultural land. Please note the fields included continue to be cultivated and providing a harvest food to date. It doesn't make any sense to use agricultural land in this way. No one should want to see the countryside unnecessarily industrialized or desecrated. Reference to the view undertaking the visual effects, specifically paragraph 73, it identifies the cottage being majorly affected at year 15. Given the major effect would be in reality the cottage in the year 2038, within the current residents, hopefully in their late 80s and approaching their 90s, will be their autumn years imprisoned by commercial avarice. Paragraph 17 review recommends a photo visualization, which hasn't happened correctly, can state no amount of hedgerow and tree planting will reduce the visual effects. Indeed, a major total unacceptable view of the cottage because it's 7 meters higher where the panels are sited. The review refers to substantial major effects. We are unsure of the severity either of what would be a substantial car or a major car crash. Which one would you want to be in? Paragraph 79 refers to a setback of 130 meters between the cottage and the siting of the panels. This has been alluded as a sufficient buffer to screen and mitigate the visual impact upon the cottage. The photo montage has been submitted to indicate the same. The photo montage, in our opinion, is totally misleading. It takes no account of the 7 meters, is 7 meters below the height of the cottage. Reference to paragraph 80, which states the hedgerows will be enhanced by gapping up. No amount of hedgerow will alleviate this under any circumstance. John and Anna would implore the planning committee to absolutely reject this proposal as entirely inappropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And again, just on 5 minutes as well. So thank you for that. And our final speaker on the guest speaker on this is the ward member, Councillor Rex Walker. So as soon as you're ready.
Members will have the great importance that government attaches to Greenbelt at the forefront of their minds following our recent training on the subject. The purpose of the Greenbelt is to safeguard the countryside from encroachment. Substantial weight is given to any harm, and this must be clearly outweighed by any very special circumstances. Regarding encroachment, when one considers the map on the screen now showing the true extent of existing and proposed development in the Greenbelt in this area, I invite you to consider, if this does not constitute encroachment into the countryside, what would? This council has prepared a local development order for the power station in purple that includes the very real prospect of 30-metre, 10-storey high buildings on land abutting the application site. You will balance the Greenbelt harm against any very special circumstances, and this is a judgment for you. However, in doing so, the harm must be clearly outweighed. In other words, these factors aren't decided on balance, on the balance of probabilities. They must be beyond reasonable doubt so that you are sure, clearly outweighed. Here, your report is instructive, perhaps providing subtle clues, perhaps a dead giveaway. The phrase on balance is used 6 times. Aside from the need for renewable energy generation, the very special circumstances put forward are weak. As you can see from the map, there are a plethora of other nearby proposed solar farm sites. It is inconceivable to conclude, as the alternative site assessment does, that this is the only possible available site. As this is put forward as a very special circumstance, it is fair game to compare the site with others. The site covered by application 319 of 2022 does not border other proposed development, is sited on significantly poorer quality agricultural land, with 95.5% classified as 3B, is situated further from established settlements, and is supported by the parishes in my ward. This site abuts a proposed colossal industrial development, has 35% good or very good agricultural land, and is closer to established settlements. We all know we need the renewable energy production. This is not the right location for it. I have significant concerns regarding how the cumulative impact of the development has been assessed. Landscape reviews, including the council's independent one, assess only the cumulative impact of the 2 other solar farm proposals, not the other 4, not the LDO, not the sand and gravel extraction at Barton, not the 3,000 homes at Fareham. How can the cumulative impact in the Greenbelt be properly assessed when the other major developments have been ignored? Failure to consider this, I must say, strikes me as so unreasonable that no reasonable person acting reasonably could do so. The Ratcliffe-on-Source Southland abuts the site. The buildings could be 30 metres high. This application and the presentation pretends we live in a world where those proposals don't exist. The cumulative extensive industrialisation of our Greenbelt is keenly felt in our community. Notwithstanding this, you've heard that the effects on the residents of the cottage and users of the footpath would be major. This will heavily reduce the sense of visual openness, says the independent review. We should and quite easily could find sites that provide the benefits we need without subjecting our residents to these acute lifelong impacts. So in summary, in policy terms, refer you to Greenbelt Matters contrary to Chapter 13 of the NPPF, amenity to nearby properties contrary to Policy 10 of Local Plan Part 1 and Policy 1 of Part 2, cumulative impacts contrary to Policy 16L of Part 2, and whether this is the best land available contrary to Policy 1 of Part 1 and 16 of Part 2.
Thank you. Bang on time, in time as well. So thank you very much for that, and all very clear. So, we've heard from the applicant's agent, Mr. Williams, representing residents of the cottage, and Councillor Walker. The points being picked up about their feeling of it being dominant, over dominant on the cottage, and worries about the solar arrays and the change, the industrial potential perception of industrial appearance. And also other comments about the visualizations and impact on the countryside and wildlife, and also the Greenbelt rules. I think those are the main areas that are covered. Can you perhaps help us with those?
Chairman, I wonder if it'd be best if we hear the debate that comes from members, and then as and when we answer those questions, we could weave in our responses to those comments.
I think, yes. I think as the debate goes on, I think that's probably best, because I suspect that I think they will come up. So, righty-ho. So we're now ready to start discussing and debating. I've got two speakers on the list so far. The first name I have is Councillor Thomas, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I've got 12 things altogether to talk about. 5 of them to do with whether or not we perhaps refuse or approve this application, and the other 7 are more about conditions that we might want to talk about adding if we do approve it. So I'll start, and if you get fed up with me, Chair, I can come back in later and finish them off. I think some of the assessments, and particularly the landscape and green belt assessment, seems to have ignored the fact that the site adjoins the southern part of the LDO site. And the solar farm would greatly reduce the buffer of undeveloped land between Kingston and this large industrial complex. If both of them go ahead, there's only going to be one field separating Kingston from the A453. And the analysis of the Greenbelt has been largely about openness, but the impact of the proximity of the LDO site doesn't seem to have considered some of the other purposes of Greenbelt, particularly the sprawl of built form and encroachment into the countryside. It's concentrated on the openness aspect, but I don't feel perhaps it's given as much consideration of the others. And in this, also in this theme, as Councillor Walker has said, the cumulative impact assessments have only considered other solar farm sites and not the proximity to the LDO site. Although Councillor Walker's map does have items on it that are housing allocations that haven't been carried forward into the next version of the Greater Nottingham strategic plan. So I think that we might need to go back to that and identify the areas that are actually scheduled for development and those that aren't. As far as the impact on the cottage is concerned, I've got a huge amount of sympathy for the residents, but there are residents all over the outskirts of all our settlements in Rushcliffe who've had enormous housing estates put next to their houses. You know, they've had green field views, and they've just got rows and houses at the end of their gardens now. And I don't see that this is any worse, really. Bad though it is, I don't see this as any worse than all those residents. The visual assessments and the photo montages have all been done with a deer fence style of security, so it's kind of wooden brown sort of fences, fence posts. But increasingly, solar farms seem to be coming back and changing the fencing, or confirming the fencing as being high security type fencing, the great big green fences, thick metal fences with sort of, you know, bits at the top to stop people climbing over, which is a much more visually intrusive form of fencing. And I would suggest that other than the sort of rural stock fencing that's shown really on the photo montages, and I would suggest that if a more secure type of fencing is to be used, that the visual assessment might perhaps need to be redone. As far as the impact on the view from the public right-of-way is concerned, I think it's appreciated, well, you know, that the margins have been increased and the wildflowers and the hedges and so on added. But the Ramblers Association asked for a gap in the hedge and panels to allow views of the hills to be continued. And I think that's something that could easily have been accommodated and hasn't been. And then if we're looking at the benefits under very special circumstances of the scheme, I don't think the food security issue has been considered. The fields, 35% of this land is best and most versatile. And it's claimed that it's been assessed as 3B because it's farmed as one unit. But the grade 2 land that's included in it, which is about a third of it, is clearly separable from the others, from the you know, the lower grade land. And the other thing about the fact that food production would be lost here, when looking at the carbon balance, as it were, that food is going to have to be brought in or imported, and the carbon miles associated with that haven't been considered in the balance. Okay, so those are the points to consider or to ask questions about in terms of whether or not we approve or refuse. Would you like me to go through the things I would ask about conditions as well, or shall I do that later?
I think if you carry on going through.
Gio, you can stand it right now.
We absolutely, we can stand it. Yes, and then you will then stand the replies and answers as well.
Okay. Possible additions to conditions if we decide to approve this. The first is in terms of how the land is managed, and Rushcliffe has passed a motion about the use of pesticides in land use, and I think that is something that could usefully be added into conditions to try to restrict the amount of pesticides that are used in managing the land during construction and during ongoing management. Another thing we hear about solar farms is that the panels are cleaned using chemicals, which then wash off into the land. And I think that's something else that could perhaps be included in conditions. The fencing, there is mention of small mammal holes, the holes for small mammals to get through, but I don't think that's very prominently put in the plans really. And I think it's very important that small mammals can traverse the site and get in and out. And I think that would need to be included. But there's also the whole business of considering the movement of larger mammals. There are badgers adjacent to the site, and the area that they are in appears to be very closely boxed in with a fence, and there's no talk about anything for allowing badgers to get around. But it's more than just badgers, it's hares and foxes and even deer. Deer may need to get around or through this site, even if they're not allowed in it. As far as the management plan is concerned, it's been talked about it's being grazed by sheep. But is this a condition? Is it guaranteed that they're going to be grazed by sheep, or is it just an aspiration that they would be? Does the farmer actually have sheep? Is he intending to keep sheep there? I've got a point about the routing of construction traffic. I appreciate the way it has been routed, but I think it would be useful from the point of view of my ward in particular, if it could be specifically said that it doesn't go down through Westleek if it's trying to get across to the A46 and so on, or coming in from that direction. And it's so I would welcome seeing that actually written in somewhere, and also awareness that there could be a possible conflict with use of Westleek Lane and the junction at the top, especially if work on the LDO has commenced when this is going on, because that is a prime routing area for the LDO traffic as things stand at the moment with the LDO plans. And the last thing I'd ask for in terms of conditions is measures to protect the fields between Kingston and the solar farm and that open space area that's been created adjacent to the cottage from any future development, solar farm or otherwise, because it is a critical buffer function. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Well, yes, that was very comprehensive, and I understand completely where you're coming from with your points there. So, can we pick up on these? We've heard reference about the being close to the LDO site. We're still not concerned about the special circumstances for Greenbelt. A lot of thought about the cottage and fence styles and the security and such like. So I saw you writing vigorously down there. So could you pick up on those, please? Oh, and also the suggested conditions as well that Councillor Thomas referred to.
Indeed, and Chairman Weiss, Mr Cook and I haven't necessarily discussed this because we were listening, but I'll probably take the first batch, and then probably Mr Cook and I probably in combination will take the detailed comments on the potential conditions or variations of the conditions in the event that committee is minded to grant consent for the scheme. I think the first two questions that I wrote, I think were overlapping, and it's in relation to the cumulative landscape and visual impacts. And I'd maybe seen them as two when they were probably one. But in terms of the additional work that the applicant did during the course of the application, the assessment of cumulative and landscape and visual effects was included whilst the application was being processed, and it was in response to some of the comments that had been raised. And indeed, that assessment looked both at the site that already has planning permission, the application site, the two other current application sites, and the proposed local development order site. And it looked through the various indications of how those would work. And again, it is comfortable within that broader context that the cumulative impacts can be managed. I think here there's the issue of sequencing, and plainly we attempted to show you the maps. Our map was effectively just showing you where we are in terms of applications for solar farms. Plainly, Councillor Walker's map has shown you a slightly broader context. I think we're all looking at the same thing, and in our judgment, because of what the independent landscape consultants has said about the nature of the local landscape and the lack of any significant intervisibility, he is comfortable that these proposals can go forward. Plainly, in terms of the impact of this application site and the council's emerging local development order, plainly that's a matter of your judgment. Plainly, this scheme is slightly more advanced than we are on the order. But inevitably, that's a matter for judgment and a matter for judgment in the round. Plainly, I understand Councillor Thomas's comments about the potential impact in the gap between Kingston-on-Soar Village and the A53. And plainly, you could see the interrelationship between those two proposals would have an impact on that gap. Plainly, we have it within our control to limit the effect of the local development order on the Greenbelt. Plainly, you'll see here our assessment of the limited impact of these proposed solar panels on the openness and the integrity of the Greenbelt. Chairman, if I move into the issue over the Greenbelt analysis and assessment, just trying to find the relevant document. It is clear that the applicant has sought to assess fully the impact of the development on the Greenbelt, and in doing so has followed common practice whereby the application is assessed against the 5 principles and 5 purposes of the Greenbelt. And there are detailed tables which explains how that has been pursued. As Councillor Thomas says, there's a degree of focus in that assessment on the openness of the Greenbelt, but then you would expect that to be the case because by definition, one of the key principles of the Greenbelt is openness and permanence. And therefore, on that basis, we as your officers were not overly surprised at the focus on openness. Chairman, in terms of the impact of the development on the cottage. We've heard a lot about that. We've heard that from the objector. Chairman, I can confirm that I did visit the site. I did meet the owners. The photograph that we showed was one of the photographs that I took. Plainly, there will be an impact. Plainly, we need to take into account normal considerations that a view isn't a material planning consideration. Plainly, there will be an impact, but that's why the applicant, even from pre-application discussion, has fully understood the need to mitigate the impact of the solar farm development on that cottage. You'll see on this plan, you'll see on the large-scale plan in front of you, why the applicant has considered this exclusion zone, if that's the right expression. And as the objector said, a distance of 130 metres to the north. And of course, that zone goes both to the east and to the west of the house. So the most significant impacts of the proximity of panels to that cottage have been significantly reduced. So that's why we feel, as your officers, that those local issues have been properly and fully considered. Views from the footpath. I think there's a general consensus that the work that the applicant has sought to do to widen the margin around the footpath is to be welcomed, and to push the panels back away from it. It may well be that this is a matter, if members are particularly keen to ensure that there are gaps within the proposed new hedgeway to give views to the broader landscape, that could be something that could be addressed within the broader landscape mitigation plan. Effectively, what you have in front of you crudely at this stage is an indicative indication through a cross section, but that would be a matter that I think we would be happy to be controlled by way of condition, if that was critical to members. And Chairman, on the very special circumstances, plainly, as I said probably an hour ago now, that will become a matter of your judgment. Whether you consider that effectively 49.9 megawatts of electricity and 14,000 homes being generated or provided with electricity is very special circumstances, is within your gift to make a choice. Councillor Thomas rightly raises the issue over effectively the loss of food crops on that site. And plainly, this can be one of the natural consequences, one of the natural outcomes. You grant planning permission for solar farms and you lose the agricultural benefit of that land for 40 years. That's a matter of your judgment. You'll have heard what the applicant says about the applicant's proposals, effectively to do different things with the land and to allow sheep to graze on it. So plainly, it's using it for a different purpose. Chairman, rather than make any detailed comments, if I can just clarify the comments that Councillor Thomas made about the quality of the agricultural land. There has been a detailed assessment of the agricultural land, and I can advise as follows. 30% of the land is grade 2, 5% is subgrade 3A, 61% is subgrade 3B, and 4% is non-agricultural. And again, that becomes a matter of your judgment in terms of how best you see that relating to national policy. What I do have, I can't show it, but I can attempt to describe it in relation to that plan, that effectively the better quality agricultural land lies to the west of the site. And Chairman, at that point, I'll pause in the anticipation that Mr. Cook might pick up on some of the detailed condition points, and then I'll fill in any gaps where necessary.
Right. Okay. So thank you, Mr. Ashcroft. So, Mr. Cook, if you pick up on those potential condition points.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think the first one is about the management of the site going forward, the use of pesticides and cleaning of the panels. We can include that as part of the condition 14, the landscape and ecological management plan, and we can add those to the list of things that we would be seeking for the site. So I don't think that's too much of an issue to take that on board. Fencing and mammal holes. Clearly, again, we could add that potentially or seek a new condition. It's not unreasonable. to again condition 14. So I'd be happy to include that requirement somewhere within either an existing or a proposed condition. Sheep grazing on site, again, that could be part of condition 14 because we're still seeking all the details of that. In terms of the routing of construction traffic, etc., I'm not sure how we can address that one, because quite often it's thrown back to us that, you know, they're public highways and, you know, vehicles can use them, and it's an issue we have in terms of enforcement quite regularly. But we can speak to.
Yeah, would it be possible, perhaps some sort of advisory or discussion with, which may not be a condition as such, but they know that committee is concerned about just a thought.
Yeah, it's something we can raise with them if we can't sort of weave it into a condition in some form that is enforceable. And the final point was the impact on the cottage and the open field. That's already been proposed as being sort of left to renaturalise. It'd be grassland, managed grassland, and any development on that site would need to come forward as a planning application because it would be a departure from what is being proposed. So we would look to control that through that process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cook. Is that helpful, Councillor Thomas? Because you raised a lot of points, and we've got some comments there on them.
Yes, I think it is helpful. I think in terms of the last point, protecting the space between Kingston and the panels, I think that could perhaps be an advisory note in terms of reminder that it would require further planning permission and the importance of those areas of land. And the routing of construction traffic, again, there is a construction management plan, but it's just a question of drawing attention to the disruption that will cause deviating from that if it goes through Westleague, which is quite likely to happen, I would think, depending on where it comes from. I think I'd be quite grateful if you could go back to Councillor Walker's diagram and go through the areas on there. That would be quite helpful. Thank you.
Yes, there we are.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those sites, some of the larger, obviously there's Fareham on there, which is under development at the minute. You've got the Gypsum site, the wider sites, the brown sites, and the large green site between the two solar farms. As I understand it, they are being promoted for development, and they've not got any status at the moment, and they will be considered as allocations, and that will be through the local plan process. But at the moment, there's no commitments on those sites.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. In principle, given the climate emergency and the energy problems, in principle, I think a solar farm is better than not. Although, personally, I would sooner see a bank of wind turbines because there's less agricultural loss. I'm pleased that the application requires an archaeological survey before start on site. But I'd just like to go back to Councillor Walker's map, and obviously he's suggesting that the whole area is being urbanised, and I'm still trying to understand which bit is which on that map, and I'd be grateful if you'd clarify that. I'd like to know where the 6-metre structure sits in the site, and in common with Councillor the previous comments anyway, I think a condition should be that there's continuing agricultural use of the land, whether that by sheep or any other means, because it is a loss of agricultural land, and that we've often, well, I've seen many applications where people say, oh, they're going to be sheep grazing, and they never do. So I just think that needs to be said. And on the condition 5, on the 6th line, it says has been submitted, and I think it should say must be submitted. If you look at the 6th line of condition 5, it says within 6 months of following the operational use of the site hereby approved commencing a commissioning method statement has been submitted. Well, it will be, it must be.
I think that's a good spot of grammar that it might need a bit of attention.
It's tense.
Yes, or tense, I beg your pardon, yeah. Okay, thank you for that. So, right. So, well, for a start, you mentioned your personal opinion of these as opposed to wind turbines. Obviously, we can't get into that because this is the application in front of us. So
Sure, but I just
take
think that the general point is if we're into promoting energy and not losing vast tracts of agricultural land, the council should be promoting wind turbines. Full stop.
Okay, and also just to confirm as well, you mentioned as well your wish for a condition about the guaranteed use of the land of agricultural. Are you're referring to what if it goes ahead? If you're referring to during the life of the application, you're not referring necessarily to after the.
Referring to during the life of the application, because the applicant has suggested that sheep would be grazed in the area, and if it's not sheep, then I don't know what else, but there ought to be a condition that the agricultural use of the land is not lost during the life of this.
Okay, understood. And then we were just going to get clarification on that map there as to which bit is what, with a bit of a description as to what is what. Mr. Ashcroft.
Chairman, thank you. I'll let Mr. Cook think whilst I fill in the gap in terms of a better description than the one he gave last time round of that map. But just really to go back to that point about the relative merits of solar panels as against wind farms. Really, as the chairman has already said, we're here to determine the application on its merits. But I fully understand the point. That said, and I think members will understand that the potential cumulative impact of a wind farm is significantly greater than the potential cumulative impact of solar farms because of their height and scale. And part of the critical comments that we're getting back from our independent landscape consultant is because of the limited height and because of the natural format and formation of the landscape and the topography here, you would have no intervisibility between the two because of the limited height, maximum of 3 meters. Plainly, some of these wind turbines, the actual mast itself is 100 meters, and then you've got the blades on top of it as well. So it's a different concept in terms of how that works through. Chairman, you've heard what the applicant has said about their ambition to have continued agricultural use of the land. We think perhaps the best way to do that is to weave that into the landscape and ecological plan because it gives us control. Plainly, there'll be a difference in the type of agricultural use. Because, of course, as we've seen previously, agriculture has quite a broad definition. So this might be better to handle in a nuanced way, understanding where the applicant's coming from, rather than a blunt condition.
Yes, it is a condition. Not a nuance.
Yes. Yeah. Got it. Yes. Yeah. Understood.
Yeah.
Just a bit more.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Whether Mr. Cook can fill in some gaps.
Well, we also had the question about whereabouts the 6 meter structure would be in the.
Oh, fine.
Yes, we just needed clarification of that. Sorry, I forgot that.
Yeah, the 6 meter structure will be located in the compound. Can we go back to the last plan?
Chairman, we'll just find you the relevant plan that shows that, which was one of the plans that we showed earlier, but we can hopefully answer that question very directly.
Yeah. Go back. Yeah, you can see in the bottom right of on the screen, you can see the wider plan for the site. The bottom right shows you the compound, and that compound will be located at the top left and it's shown again in that, and that's where it would be. So it's adjacent to, that's right, it's adjacent to the hedgerows that really will be going across the site.
Is that helpful, Councillor Jones?
Thank you, but I just was still not clear whether it's near to any of the buildings in the area, any of the properties or the.
No, it's not. It's on the farthest point away from any development. It's next to, you've got the railway line just to the right of the site. You've got the hedgerow to the top. The rest is open fields. And then obviously beyond that, you've got the A453 and the power station.
Thank you. I would also make the point that wind turbines and you've got pylons running across that area.
Yes, point made. Thank you. Councillor Bailey, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Can we just clarify what kind of fencing is proposed? We've heard about high security fencing, and we've also heard fencing for keeping in deer and such like, or keeping them out, in fact. Which is going to be proposed for this site, please? Thank you.
So have we got details of the fencing? We're just going to find it. And in fairness, Councillor Thomas made that point as well, and so thanks for picking up on that again.
But Chairman, we didn't get an answer.
No, exactly,
Yes.
precisely, yes.
Yeah, the fencing that's going to be included is shown on the plan there, in the bottom right-hand corner.
So how would you describe that fencing? Would you describe that as high security or deer fencing, please? Because it'll be very different in appearance to people walking in the vicinity or living nearby.
I would suggest that is a kind of security fencing. It's got CCTV cameras on the top, so it can be monitored along the route. But it will be a combination, but I'm not sure that it's going to be the same extent or quality that Councillor Thomas was concerned about. It will be more open.
Okay, is that helpful, Councillor Bailey? Or are you still not sure?
I'm not convinced quite what it's going to look like. And I don't know if Councillor Thomas would agree. It seems to be a little bit iffy. And it will be quite a profound difference for anybody, particularly anybody living nearby or walking nearby. Thank you.
We'll still search for answers to that, but while we're searching for those, we'll go on to the next question because Councillor Healy's indicated to ask a question. So I'll go on to Councillor Healy, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think the question I was going to ask has been more or less answered, and that is the quality of the fields. We're saying 61% is moderate. By that, I'm assuming it's not perhaps ideal for agricultural use or what it produces. My second point really is the public right of way, and once the buffer has been increased in size, I'm just wondering if we've given any thought to people who will use the right of way, who will walk through what will be or could be a solar farm, with children, I assume, and what thought have we given to perhaps just turning into a play area for kids as they walk through with mum and dad? I mean, what kind of access? I know we're talking about putting in the extended buffer, we're putting in planting and so on and so forth. It's still a hedge that individuals can get through if they wished. I'm just wondering if there's a safety aspect there or an insurance aspect. And my third question really is, we've talked a lot about the megawatts, this 49.9. Perhaps somebody could clarify that for me and maybe the rest of the committee. It seems as if that is a ceiling, and if we go above that, I just don't know what the implications are. Perhaps that could be clarified. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, the 49 megawatt. We have noticed this, so perhaps a little bit of an explanation on that as to what it means in terms of different applications, perhaps.
My understanding of that is that anything above that then becomes an application for the national infrastructure.
It's for the national.
So it's dealt with at national level and not at local level. In terms of the hedging, I think the question was about through the hedging onto the site.
Yes, I think so. You're I think talking about the right of ways going through and the hedging, and basically, are you saying would there be access to the panels through the hedging? Is that what your question is?
That's my question, really. I mean, the hedging isn't going to stop kids dashing through if they wanted to, I think.
With hedges either side.
We're just looking for the appropriate slide to try and indicate it. Yes.
That's the plan of the footpath. Clearly, you've got the hedge either side, and then beyond that, you've got the security fencing outside of the footpath. So, children should not, or anyone should not be able to get through. They may get through the hedge onto the grassland and flower planting on the other side, but the security fencing beyond that would prevent them going through.
Okay, I hadn't appreciated that. So there would be a security fence between the panels and the hedging. Okay, thank
That's
you.
right, and that could well be the fence that Councillors Bailey and Thomas are particularly concerned about, because we need to find out what it's like. Have we?
Thank you.
Are we a bit further ahead forward with that one now? Yeah. Okay. So,
Chairman, the answer to the fencing at a very high level is that there's proposal for wooden deer fencing with mammal gates around the site perimeter, but metal security fencing around the compound. So you'd have that slightly different approach for more security around the compound itself. Thank you.
right now, Councillor Thomas, you've indicated to speak again. So
Yes, thank you. I think the point is, if they are proposing wooden fencing, then that needs to be, if it's, and the compound is just that bit that's got the equipment, which is underneath the pylon, I believe, Councillor Jones, or in the area of the pylon. If it is specified in there that it is wooden deer style fencing, then that needs to be written into it, because if it's changed to the security, the tall green fencing, the thick wire security type fencing, then it significantly changes the visual impact, and I think that needs to be written into the conditions. I just thought I'd just answer Councillor, I think it was Councillor Easy question about what the different types of land, or I think 3B land, which is what 60% of this is agricultural land. It grows crops. Okay, it's not as high grade quality as 3A, which grows a greater variety of crops, but 3B does grow crops. So this land all grows crops at present, and grows food crops, and food crops much more contributing to food than a few sheep acting as lawn mowers. I think that's the point I'd make. Thank you.
Mr. Ashcroft, so you wanted to come back on that, or is it?
No.
Yeah. Okay. But basically, we've got that, I think, haven't we? So yes.
Chairman, if it helps, we as your officers fully recognise that fencing is quite critical to the success of the scheme, and also quite critical to the continued openness of the green belt. So we are comfortable with how the applicant is proposing to take this. We consider that it's already controlled by conditions, but we can firm up those conditions to take account of members' concerns. And I'm grateful for those concerns being raised, Chairman. Very briefly.
I think one of the conditions says something about confirming the fencing design as part of the condition, and I think my concern is that if it's to be confirmed at that point, it won't come back to committee, it won't come back to members and to consultation. And so I think the importance of that can't be stressed enough, really. Thank you.
And I think we've got that.
Yeah, indeed.
We have. Its notes have been written down vigorously. Right. Okay. So I don't have any other speak? Oh, it's Mr. Yes, do you want to come up?
Yeah, sorry, just to answer the question we had about this plan, I think it's Councillor Bailey,
What was the question? Sorry. Question.
about what the
What was
allocations
where?
of the
Yes,
sites
yes.
were.
Who asked the question about what was where?
No, that wasn't me.
It was Councillor Healy. Oh, I can't remember. So yeah, anyway,
Okay, I've got an answer from our policy team now. And as it said, some of the sites, which are R15.1 and R15.3, they are all sites are being promoted for development as part of the Nottingham Greater Strategic Plan, the Greater Nottingham Strategic Plan. And the only one that's really under consideration at the moment is the LDO site, which is 15.1.
actually, I think it was Councillor Jones who asked that question, wasn't it? So does that answer your question, Councillor Jones? Councillor Walker.
I think when you look at this map, you realise kind of what's going to happen to this area possibly in the next few years, which is quite massive. So I can completely sympathise with Councillor Walker and the argument he was making earlier about what's happening in the development and seeing it in a broader picture. So it makes me very sympathetic to this particular plan. Although we find ourselves in a position as a council where we have no other options, because we could be building solar panels on all those houses at Fareham, but that's not available to us because of policy. We can't do the wind turbines because, again, there's a ban on wind turbines. Again, policy. So we find ourselves in a position where we have to build on what do we call moderately good agricultural land, because we have no other options in which we can invest in our renewable energies. So we're in a terrible predicament to a lot of ways based on traps and policy. So coming back to what you said right at the beginning, Mr. Ashcroft, is yes, it all comes down to policy. And I don't really see, without the kind of these certain conditions on pesticides and chemicals that are being used and the fencing being absolutely instrumental in kind of the success of this plan, that's basically all we have left to do as a committee, because the policy coming from above on renewable energy is poor. So I just generally wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. That's noted and understood. But yes, whatever you were debating or discussing, there's always parameters and always policies, and sometimes people will agree with policies, sometimes not. But you're right, policies are in place. But also at the same time, we have to look at all the different aspects of any application, and this is no exception. As you've heard, as you're hearing this afternoon, lots of points are coming out. Right, I don't. Oh, Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask one question, and that's the impact on the cottage. They've obviously got this, and I know, nobody's got the right to a view, but they've got this view for the next 40 years. And if they don't like it and they want to sell that cottage, they're going to struggle to sell it. So is there an opportunity, if they wanted to, for this cottage to be bought by the energy company?
Mr. Ashcroft.
Chairman, that will be an entirely civil matter between the owners and the organisation who's proposing the application.
So the answer to that question, well, you've heard the answer. It's not for us to get involved with that side of things. Right. Oh, Councillor Thomas, briefly.
Sorry, there's two things I was going to touch on that I haven't got to. One is the fact that the LDO site is covered in buildings that all have roofs that will not have solar panels on unless we actually make that decision as a council somewhere along the line when we're looking at the LDO. And I just didn't want that to get forgotten, really, because there's more land. If you look at that blue blob on the left, there's more land in that bottom bit, which is going to be a mega factory, than there is in this solar farm proposal. And the other thing I thought that would be useful might be if you would like to explain why there is an additional consultation required in the approval of this process that's in the actual recommendation. And I thought it might be useful if that was explained.
That's a very good point, Councillor Thomas, because you're right. There is information in the report before where the recommendation is with some detail, but I think it will help to have a verbal explanation of that. So if you would come line, please.
And Chairman, the reason for that, and I'm sorry to say that we should have advertised the application as a departure from the development plan when it first came in, and we didn't. But effectively, that is a matter-of-fact process. Plainly, there has been other advertising that has taken place. Everybody who needed to be engaged, including the statutory bodies, have been engaged. But plainly, we didn't want to fall foul of that hurdle, so we have now advertised it. We've also taken that view on the other 2 live planning applications, so by the time they are determined, that consultation will have finished. Chairman, I think in this case, there are 2 parallel processes. There's the remaining element of that advertising as a departure from the development plan. There's also, in the event that you're minded to grant planning permission, the matter has to be referred, and the Secretary of State has 21 days in which to decide whether to call this application in for his own consideration. So inevitably, those 2 periods are overlapping. Just for absolute clarity, Chairman, what the additional advertising as a departure from the development plan is not inviting new comments over and above those which we've received. It's just advertising that as a procedural matter. But nobody has been disadvantaged by the failure to do so initially. Thank you, Chairman.
But it is advertising the fact that it's a departure from the local plan.
Well, yes, in effect, and that's why that irrespective of the extra consultation period that's referred to, if permission is given this afternoon, it still has to be referred to the Secretary of State anyway. So. Am I right in that?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to absolutely nail this, the reason why it was and has been advertised as a departure from the development plan is that it's not the type and the scale of development that was anticipated to come forward in the development plan. And plainly, as you know, our development plan has evolved over time, part 1 and part 2. And as I said, perhaps an hour and a half ago now, there was nothing in local plan part 1 or part 2 that actually brought forward specific sites for solar or renewable energy. Equally, there was nothing in it that identified sites where they couldn't come forward. But this is a general catch-all. This was not the type of application or development that was anticipated directly on this site in the local plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, final speaker is Councillor Mrs. Stockwood, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think members have been really very good in bringing forward a lot of the points that needed to be addressed. And I personally would like to say that the solar farms in my area on the east of the of Borough have this one has developed a lot better than what we have passed in the past. You know, we never considered the biodiversity and things before, so I think, you know, it is an evolving thing. And also much has been made of the 40 years. To me, technology is improving all the time, and something may come along to supersede what is in place proposed at the moment. However, I would like to propose that we accept the recommendation that put forward by the officers, that we approve this application.
Okay, thank you very much. Have you got a seconder? Councillor Jones.
Sorry, can we clarify that a condition is continuing agricultural use of the land and also the wildlife corridors through the fencing? In that case, I would second this, acknowledging all the blooming policy dilemmas that we face and the loss of somebody's view when, as Councillor Thomas referred to, many other people have suffered losses of views in the same way. So it's with a heavy heart, but yeah, second.
Okay, thank you. And also the conditions, as you will have seen, condition 5, it has been amended as per the late representations, which also takes into the account you made about the possibility, who knows, technology might change well before 40 years is up, and so who knows. Right, so we've Councillor Thomas, yes.
Plus the other conditions that I suggested that Mr. Cook.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got those. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely have one. I've got those. Yeah. So
sorry, Chair, just so everybody knows what the motion is. So Councillor Thomas had asked for an officers had offered that condition 14 could be amended to include reference to the pesticides below them, any chemicals used in cleaning, mammal holes in any form of fencing used on site, and then we discussed the sheet to go into that condition, if that's acceptable to officers.
Yes, that is, we did agree. We did
With
say that,
an
didn't we?
informative relating to the highway routing. And as you say, the amendments to condition 5 in the late reps, and as Mr. Cook outlined earlier.
Sorry, it wasn't specific to sheep, but it's continuing agricultural use. Could be pigs, it could be all sorts of things. Could be rabbits.
Yes, I think we've got that. Agricultural.
Pigs might
We
fly.
get very fixated about the sheep, don't we? Because we've all seen the pictures of sheep under these panels. And but the point, it's an important point, and yes, it is reflected in the conditions in condition 14. Right, we've had a long discussion on this, and some people may think we've gone on somewhat, but it's a very important application. So it is important that all these points are made and are very clear. So everyone needs to be clear. But we've had the recommendation moved as per just discussed and with amended conditions. So we need to have a show of hands now, please. All those in favour of the application, please show. I think that's unanimous, isn't it? So there's no one against. Right. So thank you. Permission is granted as per the report and the amended conditions, but also the additional conditions that we've discussed this afternoon. So thank you for your input, and thank you to our visitors as well. Right. I know we've only got one other application to go, but I've had an indication from my vice chairman that people want to stretch the legs. So it's 4:15. Shall we have a 5-minute little break? But please try and make it 5 minutes. And then we'll go on to our next application. Thank you. And we'll just suspend the YouTube. Right, thank you everybody we needed a little break then, and we'll go on to our next application, which is the final application for today. This is at the Glendale Golf Club, or the Ed Walton Golf Club on Welling Lane, Ed Walton. And Mr. Bridges, you're going to talk us through this, please. And welcome, it's your first meeting, isn't it? So, okay.
Thank you, Chairman. So as the Chairman just said, this application relates to the change of use of a residential flat to a golf clubhouse at Ed Walton Golf Club on Welling Lane. So the golf course is located southeast of Ed Walton, beyond the residential area and abutting the A52. As you can see, the golf course is outlined in blue and the site and its access outlined in red. The clubhouse itself is a single-storey brick building with a broadly L-shaped footprint, in which is accessed via Lytham Drive, which leads from Welling Lane. So the flat itself is the bottom of the building, which is a smaller element with a dual pitch roof. You can see it just next to the putting green. So it consists of 2 bedrooms, a sitting room, a kitchen, a bathroom and a central corridor, and at present it's vacant. The flat is not easily visible from any angle outside of the red line. It's screened by vegetation to the east, south, west, and then obviously the clubhouse is attached to the north. So the following photos show the application site. So this one is looking towards the clubhouse from the drive. Secondly, a similar view but closer to the clubhouse. So the golf course is to the left and to the right is the car park. This one is as if you've walked around towards the right into the car park, looking towards the clubhouse, and the residential flat in question is just beyond the image to the right. And then a closer view with, again, the flat on the right beyond that vegetation and trees. And again, a similar view, just a bit closer looking towards the flat, which you can see beyond the wall and the trees in the background. Although I do appreciate it's quite difficult to see through the trees. And just before we go on to the next photo, sorry. So if you just note in the top right corner of this picture, there's an evergreen tree. So just for context, as we go to the next picture. So as you can see, very central to the image behind the clubhouse is that evergreen tree. So just to provide a bit of context to where we stood now. So obviously, being the other side of the building, the flat is now on the left-hand side of the clubhouse. Again, screened by the vegetation and trees. So this picture is closer to the clubhouse with a view of the existing store. And then the next picture is now back on the other side of the clubhouse, looking towards the car park. And finally, in the very far corner of the car park, looking back towards the clubhouse. So that's a bit of a walk around the site. And it is worth noting that the golf course was removed from the Greenbelt as per Policy 4, Paragraph 2 of the Local Plan Part 1. So the proposal, it is proposed for the change of use of the 2-bedroom flat to a golf clubhouse in line with the rest of the building that it's attached to. The section of the building to which the application relates would be used for storage, and it is also worth noting that there are no external alterations proposed. I would also like to mention that the application is brought here before you today due to the council being the applicant and not due to a ward member disagreeing with the recommendation. I would also note that no objections from other consultees or residents have been received, and there are no late representations. So the 4 main planning considerations relevant to this application are the principle of development, housing delivery, impact on the character of the area, and impact upon residential amenity. So with regards to the principle of development, it's considered acceptable by officers as there are no local or national policies that would conflict with the change of use of a residential flat for the use of storage. Housing delivery, so the current property has previously been let out to staff working at the golf club, and it's understood that the golf club has no intentions to let to non-members of staff due to access and security concerns. So recently it has been vacant, and that's been due to flooding issues as per the design and access statement, and therefore the loss of the flat would not impact on the Borough Council's objectives for housing delivery as set out in the core strategy. So as mentioned, there are no external alterations proposed, and therefore it is considered that there would be no effect on the character of the area or on neighbour amenity. So, Chair, to conclude, it is therefore recommended that the application is permitted subject to the 2 conditions set out in page 3 of the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And obviously, well, as is apparent, we have no external speakers on this, so we can go straight to a discussion and decision. So, Councillor Healy, please.
Thank you, Chair. I really wouldn't want to preempt anything my colleagues might want to say, but I don't think this needs a lot of discussion, if any, and I'm happy to support the application.
Thank you. So you're basically you're moving the recommendation as per the report.
I am.
Fine, thank you. Is there a seconder, Councillor Thomas? Do you want to add anything?
I'd like to second the proposal, but I'd also just like to check. So is this like a -1 on our score of houses delivered, or is it not? Thank you.
Very cheeky question there, well, I mean, yes, let's answer it.
So as I mentioned, the flat has been vacant at the moment due to flooding issues, and before that it was let to members of staff only. So whether or not you decide to approve the application, there are no intentions that the flat could be used for a residential purpose anyway. Is that fair enough?
That wasn't quite the question, really. The question is, does it count as a -1 in our tally of houses built?
I think Mr. Ashcroft's going to give you a very formal answer now, aren't you?
Chairman, in all the circumstances, it feels like a neutral matter, given that it was never properly used as a house beforehand.
Neutral, Councillor Thomas. Right, thank you. Any other, Councillor Bailey?
I just have one question. That is the fact that there's going to be nobody living on the premises. Could that be a security problem? Because obviously there's alcohol on the premises. I'm just thinking of people coming in and breaking in at night, knowing that there is no resident person there.
A fair question. I don't think it's lived in at the moment anyway. I think it's vacant, but have we got any concerns about security and such like?
In all honesty, I'm not too sure what the security measures are at the moment, but I am aware, as per the design and access statement, that for the last, it says, couple of years, so I would assume the last 2 years it has been vacant, and they've not brought to our attention any security concerns in the last couple of years.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions, or shall we make a decision? I think we need to make a decision. So we've had the recommendation moved by Councillor Healy and seconded by Councillor Thomas. We've had a couple of questions and answers. So show of hands, all in favour, please show. And that's unanimous. So thank you. And then we just go on to the final item today, which is noting really its recent appeal decisions. Do you want to say anything? Is anyone saying anything about these, or is it just for us to, or any questions or comments to make? I know that, well, we won't get into detail, but I know that a couple of these have been very complex and ongoing and long-winded, call it what you will, but the inspector has made his decision on the various appeals, and that's probably all we can say, isn't it?
Chairman, yes, and on that very sensitive application, there are still some ongoing enforcement and compliance issues, and Chairman, I can assure you and other members that your officers will be pursuing those matters with proper vigour and diligence. Thank you.
Thank you. That's good to know. So, do we need to vote? I can't remember. Do we vote on that? Or are we just noting it? Oh, we're just noting this, aren't we? Yes, there's no need to take a vote on this. Right. So that's almost the end of the meeting. Thank you for your time and patience and input on what has been some particularly important and application. I think we've covered a lot there. And just finally to say that it's Mr. Ashcroft's final meeting with us today, isn't it? So there we are. So I thank Mr. Ashcroft for all his help and advice over the last year, best part of a year, isn't it?
Over a year.
Yeah, just over a year. So thank you and good luck with Ventures New. And so the time's just 4:32. We'll close the meeting. So thank you, everyone. Safe journeys home.